So let's talk about believing God's word, because obviously this is an important issue, because today 85% of Christian-raised children leave the church by the age of 20. That's 17 out of every 20. It's a big issue, my friends. In fact, this Darwinian biologist from Harvard and world-renowned atheist stated, the revolution against Christianity began when it became obvious the earth was ancient rather than having been created 6,000 years ago. He went on to state this finding, old earth beliefs, which only came about 200 years ago and didn't become popular until 150 years ago, was the snowball that started the whole avalanche. The age of the earth is the whole foundational issue, my friends. It's very important. Jesus said, he warned us, take heed that no man deceives you. So I'm going to try to brainwash everybody. Is that okay? Pastor Will sort of gave an okay. Now, it's only going to take a minute, and then I'm going to unbrainwash you. But I want to show you how easy it is to be misled. So don't say, if you know the answer, don't say this out loud. I want everyone to think about this. It's going to make an important point. What would you do in this person's position? A man left home jogging, and he jogged for a little ways, and he turned left, and he jogged a bit further, turned left, and he jogged further, turned left, and jogged back toward home. But as he was jogging home, he noticed there were two masked men ahead waiting for him. So what would you do? What should he do? I mean, would you turn and run the other way, yell for help, dial 911? What would you do? And here's the point I want to make. If your first thought was wrong, all of your following thoughts were way off base. You have been misled. So let me unbrainwash you. A man left home jogging, and he jogged for a little ways, and he turned left, and he jogged further, and he turned left, and he jogged further, turned left, and jogged back toward home. But as he was jogging home, he noticed that there were two masked men ahead waiting for him. A catcher and an umpire. So what should he do? He should slide, right? But if your first thought was wrong, you were way out in left field. You were completely misled on all of your following thoughts. Well, you know, for the fact of the matter is, you can tell a 6-year-old anything, and they're going to believe you, as they should be able to. But for the past 100 or so years, we've been teaching our 6-year-olds that Earth formed 4.5 billion years ago, and the evidence certifies this.
Take a look at what happened 65 million years ago.
Hang on, I can't. That's 65 million years ago.
I believe, millions of years.
So that can't be observed.
We can trace the evolution through the fossil record.
Could you be specific? Just give me one.
Between 6 and 7 million years ago.
Hundreds of thousands to millions of years?
So it's quite a long time.
Yes.
Millions of years.
Yes.
So it can't be observed.
Evolution is not testable over time.
The evidence certifies the earth is billions of years old and death existed before man, does it? Well, just in case these old earth beliefs aren't quite as certified as they promote, let me show you where the old earth beliefs come from and how they're derived. You've probably heard of carbon dating. It's used on organic remains. Now, the process of carbon-14 is what they measure, and it's manufactured in the atmosphere. Well, during the process of photosynthesis, plants breathe in CO2 that contain trace amounts of carbon-14, which becomes a part of their tissue. Now, when an animal eats a plant or breathes, they get carbon-14 in them. We all have trace amounts of carbon-14 in us. But carbon-14 decays away over time. And when a plant or an animal dies, it stops eating and breathing. At least that's always been my observation. Well, carbon-14 should decay away in measurable amounts in less than 80,000 years. Now, since they think the amount in the atmosphere is somewhat in equilibrium, not changing a great deal, they compare the amount in the ground that's been decaying away to the amount in the atmosphere, and the less carbon-14 in the organic remain, the older it's going to date, because it's decaying away. But they can only go to about 80,000 years max because the carbon-14 would be gone. So if someone tells you they carbon dated something in a million years or whatever above the 80,000 years, you know they have no clue what they're talking about. However, the assumption that the amount in the atmosphere is the same has proven greatly erroneous. because the amount in the atmosphere changes quite often. In fact, living penguins were dated 8,000 years old. Living snails dated 27,000 years old. This from the Anthropological Journal of Canada. The troubles of the carbon dating method are undeniably deep and serious. Half of the dates are rejected. There are gross discrepancies. And the accepted dates, the published dates, they're actually selected dates. Selected dates? You mean they just pick a date they want? Absolutely. Well, where do they pick it from? We'll get to that in just a minute. Let's talk about potassium-argon dating. Most of the isotope dating methods, the radiometric dating methods, are used on igneous rock. They think the melting process sets the age back to 0 from an isotope standpoint. There's about 40 different methods. They all work the same. It's actually not a measurement of time, but of radioactive decay. Well, potassium-40 decays into argon-40. That's a scientific fact. And it's a scientific fact. We have the equipment to grind up a rock and measure the amount of potassium and the amount of argon in the rock. That's a fact. It's even a scientific fact. We can measure the rate of decay from potassium to argon in today's rate. And that's where the science ends and the wild guesses begin, which corrupt the integrity. They don't call them wild guesses, they call them assumptions. Let me show you a few of the assumptions they make to come up with old Earth beliefs. They have to assume, since their potassium decays into argon, they're really measuring the amount of argon and saying it took this long to form, right? Aren't they assuming there was no argon in the rock when the rock formed? I mean, if there was already argon there when the rock formed, it's going to date millions or billions of years older than it is, right? They have to assume their rock laid there for their millions or billions of years and was never contaminated with potassium or argon. I mean, argon's a gas. It can pass from one rock to the next fairly easily. Pressure, heat, earthquakes, water running over rocks can cause contamination. They weren't there to watch the rock for their millions or billions of years. They have to assume no contamination ever took place. They assume that the decay rate we observe today has always been the same, and more studies are showing that it used to be quicker or faster in the past. And of course, they assume God had nothing to do with anything, which biases the method before it even starts. Now, if any one of those guesses is wrong, and the odds are they are all wrong, their dates are going to be off by millions or billions of years. For instance, rocks that we know formed in a Hawaiian lava flow 200 years ago were sent to 12 labs for dating. Well, the youngest age came back at 325 million years old. The oldest came in at 3 billion years old. So let me ask you a question. Where do they get the 4.6 billion year age that they certify the Earth to be? From dating meteorites. And they don't know when or where meteorites formed. The interesting thing about meteorites, they're only found in the top few strata layers. Well, wait a minute. If those layers formed and laid there exposed for millions of years before the next layer formed, and on you go up through the column there, shouldn't there be meteorites throughout all the layers, even more in the lower layers? Why are they only found in the top few layers? Because those sedimentary layers laid down by water were laid down by, water in the global flood. And only the top few layers have been exposed to meteorite impact. So bad dates are the rule when they use the radiometric dating techniques, but they'll date a rock over and over until they get a good date to select. Well, what is a good date? Where does it come from? It's selected from matching the man-made geologic column or time scale. This is important to understand. This is where the old Earth beliefs are derived from, not from some scientific isotope dating method. They're derived from the geologic column or time scale. Now, this was put together in the early 1800s, shortly after George Washington passed away, when a modern weapon was a musket, when they thought a cell was a simple gelatin-like glob of substance. It's unbelievably complex, we know today, beyond human comprehension complex. Well, so what they did was they made a drawing of 12 primary layers, and they gave an age to each layer and a name and assigned index fossils, like this fish that the arrow is pointing to. The index fossil, the story with the index fossil is that that creature went extinct while that layer was forming over millions of years of time. Now, since he was extinct, he wouldn't be found in the newer layers that formed above because he was extinct, right? So, anytime you find a index fossil in a layer, everything in the layer is given the age they assigned the layer. Well, let me ask you a question. Where did they come up with the ages of the layers back in the early 1800s? Where did they come up with the ages? Well, they made them up. Where else could they have come up with them, right? And the isotope dating methods have to match the column before they get published. This is where the dates come from. In fact, this textbook tells kids on page 306 we date the rock by the fossils found in it. Okay, but where do you come up with the age of the fossil? Well, it says on page 307, we date the fossil by the rock it's found in. We date the rock by the fossil and the fossil by the rock. They've got a total circular argument going here. For instance, lobe-finned fish were index fossils for rock up to 325 million years old. That's 5 times as long as they say dinosaurs have been extinct. We're going to talk about dinosaurs in the next message. So any rock layer found with a lobe-finned fossil in it, and everything in that layer was dated up to 325 million years old. Except the lobe-finned fish has been found alive today. Not extinct, 325 million years old. Which means those layers with the lobe-finned fossils in it could have just been a few years old, right? And let's be as fair as possible, because I did say there's 2 ways to interpret the evidence depending on which worldview you look at it through. See, I look at this picture of the lobe-finned fish, and I say that refutes the old Earth dating methods. Or you could believe that scuba diver is 325 million years old. You're going to have to choose for yourself which to believe. I think logically it's pretty obvious which worldview fits the evidence. In fact, their index fossils, which the old Earth beliefs are based upon, have become a complete embarrassment to old Earth believers. In fact, they're showing up alive today by the dozens, like the Wollemi pine tree, which was an index fossil for rock 150 million years old. It's been found alive today in 3 different locations. Not extinct 150 million years. They're showing up alive today so often they've had to come up with a scientific classification for the index fossils being found alive. They call them Lazarus taxon because they've risen from the dead. But my friends, they never were extinct. All those sedimentary layers laid down by water were laid down in the global flood, just like the biblical worldview holds. So it's important to understand the geologic column is where the old Earth beliefs are derived from. And that's very important for you to understand because the correct order of those 12 primary layers with the corresponding index fossils by which they date them have only been found in that correct order 2 places in the entire world: school textbooks and museum displays. Other than in these 2 man-made instances, in the real world, the column doesn't exist. Even old Earth faithful only claim it exists in 0.5% of the Earth's surface. But in those places where you do find 12 layers, they don't find the corresponding index fossils, which actually make up the column. So it does not exist in reality. You know, the Bible says, my people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. So let's take a look at a global flood theory. Let's take a look at the world through a biblical worldview. Now, God had shut Noah and the animals safely on board the ark. We're going to talk about this in the next message. Now, the same day, the fountains of the great deep were broken up. Most people think the floodwater came from above. Some of it did, but most of it came from below when the fountains of the deep erupted. And the earth's crust split apart around the globe as these fountains of the deep erupted, shooting scalding hot waters, muds, and magma into the atmosphere, producing torrential rainfalls. This is a map of the world fault lines around the globe. There are 50,000 miles of these fault lines crisscrossing the globe, like San Andreas Fault, which I think are just scars left over from where the fountains of the deep erupted. Well, the raging fountains brought down the water above the firmament. Now, there's a lot of speculation on what the water above the firmament was. It was destroyed in the flood. It's not there to test, study, and observe today. So I'm not going to get into the theories, but the fountains destroyed the water above the firmament. And the Bible says the windows of heaven were opened. A window is something you could see through. And the rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights as the windows of heaven came down. Now, the flood lasted almost a year. It only rained down the windows of heaven 40 days and 40 nights. And from the start of the flood, the land mass began to split apart where the fountains of the deep were exploding and dividing the continent up into pieces. The upperly exploding waters were eroding the edges of the crack, producing a muddy flow around the globe. And plants and animals were being drowned and buried in sedimentary layers stratified by the moving waters so quickly they didn't have time to rot away or get eaten by scavengers to preserve them as our fossil record we find today. Now, textbooks teach kids that fossils take millions of years to form. Well, let me ask you a question. Who's ever seen a fossil form over millions of years of time? Nobody. That's a belief. Now, if I can show you one thing that's turned to stone in less than 1 million years, I've scientifically debunked that teaching, correct? Here's a water wheel that turned to solid stone in just 65 years due to the minerals running through the water going across it. A miner left his hat in a New Zealand mine and came back about 50 years later, the hat had turned to stone. Is 50 years and 1 million years, is that the same thing? No. I can show you dozens of things that have petrified or fossilized quickly. So we've debunked that old earth belief. The fact of the matter is things must be buried quickly to be preserved as fossils. If they lay on the surface, they rot away or get eaten by scavengers. Now, like this ichthyosaur that was buried while giving birth. Obviously, something very sudden and catastrophic took place. Over the last 5 years, more than 36 dinosaur bones have been found that are not fossilized, that still have red blood cells and soft, flexible tissues in them. Oh yeah, we're going to cover this in the next message. There's no reason to believe in millions and billions of years of time that put death before Adam. Polystrata fossils are some of my favorite fossils to show folks. Polystrata fossils traverse multiple strata layers, like these trees. Some are upside down, going through multiple strata layers. Well, I thought each layer formed over millions of years. Well, we're supposed to believe a tree turned itself upside down and balanced there for millions of years, waiting for strata to build up around it? It didn't fall over. It didn't rot away. That doesn't make any sense. But I say during the flood, trees got uprooted and they floated horizontally on the surface until they waterlogged and the heavier end turned and it floated in an upright position until it waterlogged to the point it sank to the bottom, sitting against the bottom in that upright position as the flood laid down layer after layer after layer, forming polystrata fossils. You know, clams and trilobites are found in the lowest layers, so evolutionists say they're the first things to have evolved. Well, the trilobite has the most complex eye design known with 15,000 lenses. That was the first thing to have evolved. Didn't clams and trilobites live at the bottom of the ocean? Wouldn't they be the first things buried as those hot muds and magma were flowing from the fountains of the deep? Yeah, they're found in the bottom because they lived at the bottom. You know, have you ever tried to talk to a clam? I have. They just clam up on you. My wife says, don't go there. But, you know, what would you do? If you warned them, hey, there's going to be a flood, you need to get out of here, where were they going to go, right? Of course they're at the bottom. They lived at the bottom. In fact, about 10 years ago in China, they found a fossilized fish in the bottom of the Cambrian. Well, what's the deal with that? The fish is only 1 inch long, about the size of a minnow. So what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is that evolutionists say only single-cell creatures lived at this time. The fish has gills, a central nervous system, etc. It doesn't give evolution time to have taken place. Think about the situation. It had the atheist, communist Chinese scientists calling the American scientists closed-minded bigots because they wouldn't consider the fact we just might have been created. In fact, the lead Chinese scientist stated in frustration, in China we can criticize Darwin but not the government. In America, you can criticize your government, but not Darwin.